He currently serves on the CFA's Institute's Standards of Practice Council. Mr. Vineet Yash.
I think the beauty of any compliance leader or a professional in that space is to find the delicate balance or creative ways to delicately balance the compliance and business needs.
So, having led teams through the implementation of key regulatory frameworks and policies, what would you say is the most significant challenge when aligning business objectives with evolving regulatory demands?
It's always the greed for hefty returns and the fear or the risk of losses that drive any decision making.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to FaceTime with Leaders, a podcast series by Directors Institute World Council of Directors. I'm your host, Tanay All, and today we have the privilege of speaking with a seasoned expert in regulatory compliance, risk management, and legal advisory within the financial sector. Our guest, Mr. Vineet Yash, brings over 24 years of experience across regulatory authorities in India and Middle East and leading financial institutions comprising leading banks and global FIs. His leadership in banking, capital markets, insurance, and asset management has earned him distinct respect in the industry. A master's in commerce and a qualified lawyer, Mr. Vineet also holds the CFA Charter, FRM, CAMS, and certificate in ESG investing. He currently serves on the CFA's Institute's Standards of Practice Council, contributing to the 12th edition of its globally recognized Code of Ethics and Standards. His commitment to integrity and excellence continues to define his professional journey. Mr. Vineet, it's a pleasure to have you with us on the show today.
Thank you so much, Tanay. And it's quite flattering to hear such a warm welcome which you gave to me again. And thank you so much also to summarize my professional journey in brief words. Happy to be here. And the word Mr. sounds a bit too much weight on my shoulders. So if you can just address me, Vineet, that will be fine. But I leave that to your comfort and my
Lovely,
pleasure.
sir. It's a pleasure to have you with us, sir. Sir, every leader has a unique career journey, which is often marked by pivotal moments that go beyond the corporate resume. Could you please walk us through the early stages of your career and share the moment when you realized that leadership was the path for you?
Thank you, Tanay, for posing such a challenging question, I would say, because it would require me to have a roller coaster ride into my past. Again, I, as a leader in compliance and risk, I always believe doing the right thing is the natural thing. And being born in a family of corp, my father being a great corp who sacrificed his life in the line of duty, I think my exposure to doing the right thing came quite early as a kid. Uh, as you'd say, being in compliance, legal and risk, which is the second line of defense, the natural choice and closest civil life analogous role, I would say, or equivalent in financial institution. I think I'm leading similar kind of role by being a line of defense to the financial institutions to ensure that they remain safe and sound and free from financial crime. If only people did the right thing, the world would have been a better place. Now, speaking particularly from a career, as you posed me, you know, the personal traits and leadership ones generally drives the journey of every leader and every individual, and not necessarily all aspects in life you would figure out when you start with. I'll give you a perfect example. Uh, and it comes from my first employer, my initial employer, which is the Indian Capital Market Regulatory Authority. When I started my career around 23 years back, I joined the institution, SEBI, which is the Capital Market Authority for India, in general stream, but being legally qualified, I was chosen to, at that juncture, be in the legal vertical. Now, as it would have at the juncture, I was not so happy with that call taken by the institutions. But as times evolve, we figure out things. So the role required me at that juncture to possibly step into the shoes of the then SEBI chairman. Again, I'm talking of a seasoned professional who has more than 30 years of experience. I, being the first person just joining the job market or in the financial institution, it required me to think from the perspective of such a seasoned professional and draft the market related orders. uh, it was quite a challenging, and certainly the drafting was there. It was to be done within the limits of the boundaries and the legality which we have. But at the same time, it was quite challenging to think from a perspective of such a seasoned professional. And possibly at that juncture, the gentleman was from the Indian Administrative Service, having served a breadth of experience over his career and cadre as Indian Administrative Service. It was quite challenging. Now, the point I'm trying to bring, I think that was the turning point where I realized leadership comes natural to me, in the sense that you have at one juncture a professional who is just starting, and then you have to step into his shoes and think vicariously from the perspective of such a great leader to be ensuring that, and then you know how in the capital markets are, any restrained orders or any order which goes against the market, it's subject to challenge. So, despite being in such a challenging position, to my credit, during the 2 years I served in legal vertical, I had roughly 30 to 40 market related orders and all sustained the legal scrutiny and even the test of market. So, to so to sum up, Tanay, like sometimes the best opportunities comes in forms like this, where you could not figure out what that role would entail. So leadership is not always about the positions or designations you are given by the organization. It's how you live up to a particular situation, and then you take it those challenges which are given to you and then perform to the best of your abilities.
Yeah. And whether you
Uh,
like those challenges or not, leaders like such challenges and want to, solve problems from the front.
Possibly, and that's what I said. It was one of the my first exposure, and then seeing that it comes naturally to me.
Yeah. So you have an exceptional track record in navigating complex regulatory landscapes, particularly across multiple jurisdictions. In your view, what have been some of the most critical leadership decisions you've made when it comes to balancing strict regulatory compliance with the need for business growth and innovation?
That's again quite a challenging question. Tanay, I think you have chosen all the challenges for me and made kept the easier bit for yourself.
I try.
uh, yeah, I think you're good at your job. So, you know, in business, especially when it comes to financial institutions, we
Yeah,
operate in a very globally in a very highly regulated environment. That's
yeah,
how it is. Financial institutions are one of the heaviest regulated institutions globally. Like every crisis, whenever there is a crisis, and the last or big one is 2008 financial crisis, subprime crisis, it led to plethora of changes in the rules and regulations. And more so, if you look at the recent COVID one, again, it brought lot of nuances. So the subprime crisis led to incrementally cost of compliance from capital perspective. The COVID one brought a lot of challenges from the perspective of resilience and business continuity. Now you have the recent geopolitical crisis, which is there in the region, Middle East, where I operate, and even globally, you have Russia and Ukraine war, and that brings the increased cost of compliance due to sanctions, which has been imposed. And again, the space and the area keeps changing and evolving on a constant basis. On one side, you have business compulsions to move fast, innovate, while on the other side, you have the regulatory compulsions of precision and to have patience. Yeah. Many times the objectives which are set for the institution and those objectives which the regulatory authorities have, they're not harmonized. There's not a perfect alignment. That creates the biggest challenge. Yeah. You know, in a dynamic environment, especially when you have senior stakeholders and the board members, they need to factor these nuances in the business plan. Yeah, we operate in a highly dynamic plan environment. So that's where the biggest challenge is. Again, to me, the biggest challenge is about the regulatory requirements, which I lead in terms of trying to give a business-friendly, practical advisory. But the biggest challenge is the regulatory requirements, which are the laws, can be read by anyone because it's in the language of, say, in Bahrain sometimes or the Middle East, we have Arabic. But even if that's translated, any person can read and understand. But those understanding and views need not be aligned with the views of the regulatory authority because there are certain nuances which needs to be only deciphered by very seasoned professionals on that. So this is the daily dilemma. Everybody has a view on the rules, but those views may not be aligned with regulatory intent. So when you have legal requirements, there is an intent of law and there is a letter of law. Both may not be always the same. And despite the best of the legal acumen to draft, there's always an intentional leeway left by the regulator in those rules to ensure that they can interpret the rule based on the different types of institutions they are regulating. Because rules are a uniform playing field, they apply to all the institutions, but need not that an institution which creates more risk is to be looked from a more closer scrutiny by the regulator. So
Yeah.
that's a constant challenge. And it's a daily dilemma and a struggle.
Yeah.
And then more so when you have your own team. In your team, you have some element of direct or matrix reporting where you have an element of authority. Even if they don't like it, they sometimes succumb because you are the leader and you are the manager. You are telling them this is what it is, and they will agree.
Yeah.
But the biggest challenge comes when you're dealing with senior stakeholders and board members. There is hardly an element of direct authority. And that's where I think when the organizational remit is not there, it's always a difficult balance to choose between compliance over growth or growth over compliance. I think the beauty of any compliance leader or a professional in that space is to find the delicate balance or creative ways to delicately balance the compliance and business needs. And that's a
Yeah.
constant challenge which I have been struggling on in this field. But to me, that's where the struggle lies. You don't have a direct influence. It's more of a moral suasion. It's your board members, senior stakeholders, they need to understand the real perspective of those regulatory requirements. And sometimes, despite the best intent, because of the lack of time or whatnot, they may not have that kind of time to go through the nuances.
Yeah. And hence it is more important for somebody else to keep the balance in check.
Balance in check, but you are not the ultimate decision maker. Generally,
Yeah.
compliance and others, they are the second line of defense. They have a direct reporting line to the board, where administratively you on daily basis engage with your CEO or your
Yeah.
top management. So again, the top management compulsions are more business driven always because much of the bonuses, much of the financial performance is tied to that. Again, I as a professional has always tried to create a unique balance. I fully understand, and my rather disjoint happens with my fraternity people who sometimes because there is a new school of compliance, there is an old school of compliance, thereby many people, and I'm not to discredit of anyone, everybody has a reason why they operate like that. In past, we have seen that saying no to business was seen as an upper hand, whereby you wield a power.
Yeah.
Now, for me, the power is in letting go and making things simpler rather than saying no. So I generally say yes, but if there are certain ways or mechanisms where you need to evolve the business or tighten the controls, I come from that perspective. And certainly it may have cost, but then the business needs to balance that for a sustainable growth and long-term sustainability of the business.
True. So, having led teams through the implementation of key regulatory frameworks and policies, what would you say is the most significant challenge when aligning business objectives with evolving regulatory demands? Like, how do you ensure that these regulatory shifts don't stifle business agility?
So again, Tanay, I'll further take from what I have delved in the last response. You know, I alluded it previously. Biggest challenge is the regulatory requirements. And despite their complexity, everybody has a view. There's nothing wrong, and please don't get me wrong. I'll clarify this. There's nothing wrong for everybody to have a view because in certain circumstances, when it's not about regulatory requirements, and I'll further deal with that, having a varying views in any organization and divergent views creates or gives place for innovation, out of box thinking. It's perfectly fine. But when it comes to strict regulatory requirements, and I'll give you examples as well what I mean with the strict regulatory requirements, in those cases, the views of compliance and legal professionals, because they are trained to decipher what are those nuances, it's very important that you go by the subject matter experts. Yeah. Now, the challenges come and you have to navigate them because of the varying views. But in if the views are not aligned with those of the regulatory authorities, you can face severe regulatory scrutiny, and in worst cases, it can lead to penalties or fines. So that's where I would bring a famous adage, which everybody, or you may have heard that, and at the risk of being sounding cliche, I'll still use that. If compliance is costly, I would advise anybody to try non-compliance, and
Yeah.
that it can lead to you stopping the business in and the regulators have, in multiple instances, even taken away the license.
The bigger
So
picture.
I'll possibly take an analogous and contrarian view that compliance is, people say that compliance is there to stifle business or to stifle innovation. My view is completely contrarian on that. To me, there's no compliance if there is no business. It's something like that. If or if we don't have traffic, the traffic lights lose all the significance. So business has to certainly thrive to have the nuances and compliance embedded into that to ensure the long-term sustainability of the business.
Yeah.
I see compliance to be a purely facilitator or enabler to navigate the complexities via business-friendly, practical advisory to translate those complexities into the practical steps to do an ordinary business. Quite strangely, and to some of my credit, I would say, having such a breadth of experience and supported by the best of the academics, I have seen that I had the ability to preempt much of the regulatory requirements. And I'll also draw a parallel. The regulatory requirements generally follow a suit. Like we are different tangent of the learning curve with different region, different places, different regulators. And there are standard setting bodies which sets out the how the expectation of the rule should be. So to that effect, I have seen regulators generally follow the suit. If one regulator does say something on consumer protection or not, generally other regulators will follow the suit. And generally, we see that globally, all the regulators have a level playing or try to create a level playing field. But despite that, there are variances because of the different stages of development which different institutions are. So again, quoting examples for my previous employer, where I was working with the Indian Capital Market Regulatory Authority, I had very passionately worked on to unify the requirements across the market, and this I'm taking myself on a higher pedestal vis-a-vis working with a bank, because when you're working with a regulatory authority, you have a broader mandate to look into the difficulties which are faced by the financial institutions and even the investors. So therein, I had very passionately worked on transmission of shares. And if you'd like to more understanding what is transmission of shares, I can further talk on that later on. But a person dies, a family member or investor dies, and he has not made the will, and there's a constant struggle faced by the bereaving family member. First, they have lost someone in the family, and now there's a constant struggle to get those shares or invested money into their account, although we are selling of those shares or transfer of those shares. The complexity was so wide. Every company had a different set of requirements, make it very complex. And even at that juncture, there was nothing for nomination, which is a very common thing in a bank account. But at the juncture, there was nothing in terms of that nomination is mandatory. To my credit, I had worked with the committee at that juncture to ensure that the difficulties which are faced by the investors at large are unified. Now, to my credit as well, the nomination, and you operate in the Indian market, and if you invest, you'll understand nomination is now mandatory, and every bank for the demat account they require nomination to be there. That will ease the whole process, and it will give more protection to the hard-earned money, not only to the surviving family, but also you have a peace of mind when you're doing something for your family, that your well-earned money goes to your loved ones. So, having worked with some of leading institutions, I realized that at times having a robust compliance framework has resulted in business enablement rather than a deterrence. Like, I'm taking a contrary view than what you had posed
Yeah.
me, right? But that's what it is, and this has resulted into more of building trust, and not for compliance to be an obstacle to doing business. That's how my work ethos has been,
Yeah.
and that's possibly what makes me a bit unique in terms of trying to understand business. And as you would say, again, I'll correlate it to my academics or certifications. So I'm CFA, like every nuance of business, which any business leader would understand. I have that understanding and try. That's where my compliance advisory takes an edge versus possibly somebody other who may not have those kind of broad understanding.
Yeah. So, as the global financial landscape becomes increasingly interconnected, how do you manage cross border regulatory risks, especially in areas like financial crime compliance, sanctions, and AML? Could you share an example of how you've ensured that operations stay compliant without sacrificing operational efficiency?
You again, I have to say, you have thought about your questions in well-structured manner, but those are real complex ones. I don't know whether I'm doing justice to all of them or not. And for the audience who will listen to the podcast subsequently.
I'm
Uh,
sure you are, sir.
so the contrary is that we operate in ever-evolving regulatory landscape. That itself was not enough a challenge. Then we have the interconnected of the world order by the advent of technology, and much of the financial institutions now they operate cross-border. Even they don't have cross-border operations due to the very nature. Like, you have the correspondent banking where money needs to be transferred from one region or the other. The, and then more so, even if the institution is locally based, you have a client base. So me, Vineet, I can choose to be investing in US market. I can choose XYZ broker and do that. So that's where the as a customer, I can transcend any of the markets.
Yeah.
Now, the customers, they rely on financial institutions to create certainty or to ensure that the promised service is being offered. If I were to say subscribe to a brokerage service in the US, my basic expectation is that my transaction is liquidated, my money is safe, and whatever investment I do, they get executed in an orderly manner in the way I want and within the time frame which is set by the T+1 settlement or T+2 settlement. Different globally institutions are the varying regulatory requirements between the home regulatory requirement, which is the head office requirement, and I have operated in global institutions, the say MetLife, just to give an example, they operate in 40 countries. So the US is the home office, which is the head office requirement, one of the stringent of the requirements. And then you have the nuances of the various units and foreign jurisdiction where those entities operate. Those are the host regulatory requirements. To achieve harmonization, because I may have alluded earlier, different region and different businesses in the region are different tangents of their maturity, and even the regulators are at different tangent of their own development and trying to imbibe the best of the practice from other parts of the world. So different regions are distinct stages of development, and that is the main issue which is creating the harmonization or disharmonization, if I would say, or invent a word at this juncture. So some practical examples I'll say. we and it has happened in core practice, and I'll give some flavor from the financial crime element and try to bring that. But let me first bring an element from, like, an uncertainty of transactions, which I talked or touched upon earlier. Every institution or bank, especially, they rely at the back end on the core banking system to ensure the certainty of the transaction. Now, for a payment to happen at the back end, the system also has an interplay with the sanction screen, because you need to be sure that if you're operating globally and the money has to leave the system, they are screened. And as we were to go live on the core banking, lo and behold, and it happens every time, we realized that the backend screening system was not operating. Now, the call at the juncture, it was very unnerving. It created immediate panic moment. Do we pause or delay the launch? So at the juncture, I had to literally step in with uh, unraveling that unnerving situation, lead from the front, talk to the team, and try to understand what could be done to ensure that the timelines are not delayed. In those junctures, your biggest responsibility as a leader comes in by shielding all the heat which comes from top management from your team. You
Yeah.
need to shield that. Otherwise, even the best performing team, they lose the sight, and they get bogged by those internal dynamics of the institution, what will happen and things like that. So to the credit, that's how we have worked in one of the peculiar scenarios whereby the APIs or the interface or the plugin with the core banking had failed, but we were able to navigate that. Again, an additional area I think is the sanction, and I'll say that's a constant struggle, especially related to, I mentioned that earlier, the Ukraine and Russia war. Now, their business compulsions, Russia and much of the people who were in Russia and Ukraine, they had like a lot of money, and they have shifted to lots of different parts of the world. And you may have read that Dubai is now attracting a lot of people from Russia and Ukraine because of the ease of doing business. But operating in this region, again, there are certain things which are clear no-go, but again, there are other things which are in the gray area which you need to navigate. Business compulsions are always there, and they create lots of pressure on daily basis. This still was a bit easier. I'll give you another example. So I have been with an institution which manages the frozen funds, and my our main shareholder was one of the central banks located in the Central Bank of India. Now, the funds are frozen. You need to engage, and you need to manage those funds. You need to only engage in those funds with uh, the permissible sanctions or NOC, or the ability to deal when you have clearance from the United Nations. Now, I'm talking of billions of dollars, and that's where you need to be managing the client's asset to the best interest of the client. But lo and behold, those are frozen. So that's the you see the adaptability of the situation. You have to ensure that the client systems are managed in the best manner, but
Yeah.
them being frozen, it faces a lot of challenges, and you can't deal with a single cent or penny without the UN engagement and UN go ahead. And if you do so, you have the strict liability, and you know how fines run millions and billions in the
Yeah.
US if you deal with sanctions.
Yeah.
So I think it tries to summarize the various challenges we have been facing. Uh, Struggle is not, again, I said, the requirements or the varying requirements which are there. It's to make the management understand that if you have the culture of doing the right thing, if there's tone from the top, it always becomes easier to be compliant. And then, as again alluding to the earlier conversation, everybody has a varying view on the regulations,
Yeah.
but you need to therein go by the views which are from a subject matter experts, in the sense that they are there to safeguard the institution from such big fines which can erupt in future. So again, the beauty is for compliance, risk, and business professionals to come together to collaborate to find the best solution so that the views and the institution to ensure that the views of compliance professionals are not marginalized, because that may create possibly for a short-term benefit if the views of the professionals are marginalized, but it can have impact on the long-term sustainability of the business. So sometimes you need to go back to basics, do the right thing, focus on the solution which is there rather than focusing on the problem. It's something like I would again draw a parallel from driving, and unregulated driving creates risks. It's one of the, I think, very grave areas which is overlooked. You drive rash, you can lead to your accident and the accident of others, and possibly in the worst case, kill others. So the same in financial institution, you're guarding or you're dealing with money of somebody else who may have put all his life saving into the accounts. And if you deal in such a way that the risk are being unregulated, you have seen institutions failing, and then the person who has bestowed all his trust goes for a toss. So
Yeah,
this is where I think it becomes very
true.
challenging.
Yeah.
And
Eh,
as leaders, you need to be very mindful that if somebody has put his trust in you, that trust is lived, and that's a paramount
absolutely.
expectation.
Yeah. Okay, sir, now time for our very own rapid fire round. A few quick questions and, if possible, some really quick answers. So here it goes, sir. If you could switch lives with anyone for a day, who would it be?
That's I never thought from that perspective, but uh, I would choose Roger Federer. I'm a big
Okay.
tennis fan,
Okay.
and the reason there again it's a quick rapid fire, but I'll try to put some reason. The man, how he has managed to make choices in such difficult situations where a ball has to hit in a particular fashion at the say nth of a second. So it would be him for my love for this sports and to understand the mindset to make the right decision under tough situations.
Yeah. What's your guilty pleasure when it comes to food?
I'm a bit foodie, but to me, I simply love Chinese food.
Okay.
And the nice version, but I have tried in other areas as well. I love Chinese.
Okay.
That's what.
If you could have dinner with any fictional character, who would it be?
Again, I would choose rather non-fictional because to me, at this juncture, having dinner with Roger Federer seems fictional because such a great man and for the love of the sports. But if you insist to choose a fictional character, I'll choose Superman possibly,
Okay.
just to understand how the person with such an immense power and can be so composed and be rational with so much restraint to use his powers.
What's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning?
I generally try to end the day with a positive thought, and that leads to my planning for the next day. But
Okay.
to your question, what I do, which wake up in the morning. So I take the day quite positively to understand what the day has in store for me and to make the most out of that day.
Okay. What's the one thing on your bucket list you're yet to tick off?
I'm not sure what you think of me, but there are a lot of things on the bucket list, Tanay, which I'm yet to
Okay.
achieve. But possibly one which, as per of late, is to be witnessing the Wimbledon finals, tennis finals. You need to be in a select list to be getting the invite and the tickets, generally by invitation. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's one.
Okay. What's the most recent show or movie you've binged watched on?
So of late, things have been a bit hectic, but the one I remember and which I would like to quote is The Suits, which was I simply loved. And being a lawyer, the courtroom drama or the real life drama, it was quite
Yeah.
fast paced. I love the character of Harvey Specter and Michael Ross. Their ability to deal with challenging situations It was quite amazing. I know it's a more fictional, that doesn't happen in real life, or maybe it happens in the US corporate. But again, that was real good. And I binge watched that, and I could not take away myself. The other thing I generally, I'm a huge James Bond fan, and my dad was, so I try to relive those memories by watching James Bond movies also at leisure. I relive those moments.
Lovely. If you had to describe your personality in just three words, what would they be?
That's again a challenging thing. I would say dependable, compassionate, and emotionally intelligent.
Lovely, sir. Thank you so much. That gets us to the end of our rapid fire round. Now back to some more slightly serious questions. So, with your expertise in financial crime compliance and risk management, how would you approach the detection and prevention of Ponzi schemes and high yield investment programs in the financial institutions you work with? And what regulatory safeguards would you prioritize to protect investors from falling victim to such scams?
Tanay, it's a very important and pertinent question. I think possibly in the early discussion we alluded that. So, in my compliance advisory, covering business element and leading the complaint management, whereby I was manning the escalation channel. So when uh, there could be investors who feel more aggrieved and they would like to escalate rather than going through the normal judicial. Uh, I have seen that there are two things which drives the whole decision making and by investors or the financial institutions. It's always the greed for hefty returns and the fear or the risk of losses that drive any decision making which happens with most of the people who are dealing in the either by in the financial institutions themselves or at the receiving end as customers. Usually, regulatory expectations are quite clearly now, by this juncture after the financial crisis, well laid out that financial products which are offered to investors, they need to have a proper understanding of the investor due diligence and what the investor really wants from the institution. Yeah, it's a very, and the regulatory requirements are quite well laid out in terms of that. Now, the problem happens, the misalignment in the expectations of the relationship manager who may be working to make an easy buck by selling to the investor front-loaded, highly commission-oriented, whereby it serves his purpose more than the purpose of what the investor has come to the institution for. Yeah. That's where the regulatory expectation and regulatory expectations are quite well laid out. The problem happens, we have seen that much of the regulatory authorities at times, though having the mandate that one of the primary mandates of all the regulatory authorities globally is to protect the investors. But because of the lack of close supervision, on-site reviews, and having worked with the regulator, I can bring an insight. Much of the regulatory authorities are strained in terms of resources, bandwidth, whereas they're regulating a whole plethora of licensees which sell such complex products. So that's where the challenge happens because of the priorities, and you need to even keep pace with the new developments which are happening, while you need to safeguard the basic, which is the trust, and ensure that your investors are well protected, and especially retail investors. So you have seen that in the financial crisis. Many times it's the greed, the custom protection takes the back seat,
Yeah.
not because the intent is not there. It's just because the priorities have been at different places, and even for high investment, high yield investment products, that's what we have seen. It's a perfect example where greed becomes the sole driver, not the risk.
Yeah.
And we have seen that in one of the biggest Ponzi scheme which unfolded during the 2008 crisis, Bernie Madoff. Again, it was not the controls or the oversight which brought that such a big Ponzi scheme, which was running into billions of dollars, to the
Yeah.
forelight. It was more the guilt of the person himself, Bernie Madoff, who admitted that he's running the Ponzi scheme. And then it led to the multiple investigations where everything was unearthed. So that's where is the person admitting. So you can see that how a multi-million or billion-dollar scheme the regulators could not even unearth. It was very telling at that juncture. It had not the proper audit. Everything was run within the family. Not much disclosure were happening on the schemes. So the gentleman was taking money from one, paying the other one, and everybody got a good return till he was unable to sustain that going forward.
Yeah.
So the biggest challenge therein is that the regulators have to do more, not forget their primary mandate, which is to protect the investors. And I'll also draw an analogy, or I'm not sure, given your age, whether you have the proper recollection of those whatever happened in 2008, but you may have read that,
Yeah.
Tanay. So what has been happening even during those times? You had such a complex or structured products which we don't see anymore. So you have those collateralized debt obligation. And not only that, it was a paper on a piece of paper which was written and which had a financial value. So you had a CDO, collateralized debt obligation. Not only that, CDO square, and you had CDO cube, where the real asset was so far dispersed from the
Yeah.
main underlying. And not even financial experts, I consider myself to be a bit of expert. It defied my basic understanding. So how would a basic person to whom, or even institution to whom those products were sold, would decipher? You have the perfect example of Lehman collapse. Much of the products were guaranteed or had a guarantee. Now, when the liquidity gets sucked up from the system, possibly legally, those guarantees would stand. But if there is no money to pay, what the guarantee has a value in practicality. So it's coming back to this thing. When the regulatory focus shifts from investor protection and
Yeah.
it allows one of instances to become a systemic for the market, that's where the Ponzi schemes and things like this prosper. I
Yeah.
would urge all the regulators to keep that and not to forget that. And the problem is, with the crisis of 2008 being so far, we have all possibly forgotten that. But it has been seen repeatedly in all the crises which we have had. The basic telling remains the same. So, again, close scrutiny for the regulators to be there. And I think it's more for the institutions also to ensure that there are proper guardrails set within the institution, that when a new product is launched, you do a proper need analysis, ensure that your your mechanism within the institution is set in such a manner that there's less of risk of mis-selling, and that's where the beauty of engaging. Yeah. So, then I just to conclude on that, as we would say, when the regulatory focus shifts from, and people forget what are the learnings from the past crisis, and again, the the greed taking over the risks, we have similar issues. But again, it's all the human psyche which plays out. I'll give you an anecdotal incident I have an anecdotal incident to say that you can find funny. So I was leading an investor seminar, and it was about investor education on how the risks and pitfalls of investing. And we did a lovely seminar. That's how the audience reactions showed, at least when the seminar was on. So I had a very elderly gentleman coming to me. So I thought maybe he has a query, or or he wanted to compliment me for such a good organized session. And lo
Yeah.
and behold, if you end up laughing, because he comes to me, talks in a bit of low tone. Sir, do you have any tip? So we have been talking about the investor protection. What are the guardrails a person should be having if we want to invest in the securities market? But then after that, the the funny bit is the person comes and asks, "Do you have any tip for the market to make easy money?" So it was this
Yeah.
this is how it happens.
Yeah, there'll always be people who still don't want the regulations to happen, find loopholes, want a workaround, but I guess you have to be strong enough to not do that. Finally, sir, could you please share your experience of joining Directors Institute? How is it contributing to your understanding of corporate governance?
So, Tanay, that's again, I'm not too, haven't my journey with the Data Institute hasn't been long enough, I would say. But again, having all the while working for last 25 years, be it with leading regulatory authorities or financial institutions, with operations spanning across, say, the market, with in those roles requiring me either directly to report or through, say, indirect reporting to the board and to deal with board, I was always intrigued quite on the various dynamics and the role which board plays to provide the right stewardship to any
Yeah,
financial institution, yeah, especially by the independent actors, to ensure that the interests of wide plethora of stakeholders which we have are well protected, and including the minority shareholders. That's where I think the beauty of a director or independent actor comes in. Now, the choice to join the Actors Institute happened around 3 months back, and I assess many a times uh, that it was the natural corollary or an outcome for me, because having done the breadth of academics till now, and then having worked with closely with the board, yeah, and especially independent actors, I think there's still a lack on the supply side of well qualified professionals who have the requisite certification in terms of their ability to understand the control framework, and at the same time to balance the business needs which are there. So I think, as I was saying, the courses like the one offered by the Actors Institute, I understand there are other courses also, but since I'm here with you, I find the course to be quite well structured for professionals who are aspiring to be next set of directors or independent actors. The course structure is well curated, and the instructors are leading experts, and the best part, and you have diversified participant group. Again, in my group I've
yeah,
seen people, and people have reaching out to me who are operating in the fashion industry, who are operating in different, let's say, ESG is their vocation that they practice. So again, ESG is a very important the environment, social, ESG governance bits. It takes now the predominant role in terms of ensuring the long-term sustainability of the organization. So I see the course to be well curated, as I told. And then more than that, the course association with the, I think, the Oxford School and the Sale School of Business, whereby you get the alumni status from the Oxford University, a world-renowned university. I think it's quite, I would say, a stamp of credence to what the Actors
yeah,
Institute is providing. To me, the course is simply a practical assimilation or assimilation of everything which I have done practically over the years. Yeah. And the experience of the engagement with board over the years. So the structure and the content flows quite naturally to me. Again, not to take away any benefit from the well curated course, not much is new to me, but how you weave everything and bring that in the board, the real life experience, yeah, whereby you are trying to imbibe the boardroom mindset, yeah, trying to balance the business needs, yeah, ethics also has to play therein, ethical decision making, whistleblowing, which rests with the board. So how you are weaving all those things together to ensure that the stakeholders interest, and especially of the minority shareholders, are well protected, ultimately contributing to the long-term sustainability and growth of the institution. So
yeah.
I see that institute fitting in, and my course and my association to be fitting well in that what I'm aspiring to do in my next phase of life.
Thank you so much for this kind words, sir. And that's a wrap for today's episode of FaceTime with Leaders, brought to you by Directors Institute, World Council of Directors. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Your insights into leadership, compliance, and governance have been truly inspiring, sir. And I'm sure all our listeners today have a lot of valuable takeaways. Thank you so much.